hope you will join us as we are today going to be talking about a book which I've known about for some time. It is now republished by Whitaker House called The Leftovers, Baylor, Betrayal, and Beyond, and is written by Matt Sayman, who was on a full athletic scholarship to Baylor University, played basketball during one of the most tumultuous times in the history of that school and of college athletics. He currently is the varsity basketball coach at Grapevine Faith Christian School here in the state of Texas. He hosts a podcast, JAMODI, Just a Matter of Doing It podcast. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And he joins us now in studio. So, Matt, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me. This is incredible.
And again, you do a podcast, but usually you don't have quite as many people running around here and helping you out. And so this has been great to have you join us here. You are one of those leftovers, and some people might go, what is that? That was a statement I think Scott Drew, who is the coach of the Baylor men's basketball, used. I thought we might as well get your testimony. And the first is that it starts in Pennsylvania, Berwick, Pennsylvania, and so just kind of a normal middle-class lifestyle, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I grew up being a Yankee, and so y'all wasn't a word that we used, and I don't think I still don't use it. It doesn't come out organically, but yeah, I had a great upbringing with two parents that had us in church every Wednesday, every Sunday, and so when I was 5, I actually got baptized, and really, I thought our family did church really well. You know, if it was open, we were going to be up there. And so I kind of grew up with those values. But then around the age of 9, I found something else, and that was basketball.
Yes.
And I kind of threw myself completely into that.
First of all, let me just mention that later on when people would ask you to give your testimony when you're a Baylor, you said, oh, yeah, well, I became a Christian at a young age. Boy, that's really scintillating. And right. You had one of those kind of testimonies, although just as we talked about with a guest yesterday, you were certainly growing up in church, and then you strayed and then came back. So there is part of that story as well. But for those of us that played basketball, we didn't have videos back then. So my dad would get me a book on that, and this is a father who's showing you a two-handed set shot. So obviously learning jump shots and things by yourself, not from the way it used to be played. But you had the opportunity to see some videos by Pete Maravich, who was one of the great showmen of all time of basketball, and you began to dedicate yourself to basketball in a very significant way.
Yeah, I was fortunate I think a lot of players they'll play multiple sports. They'll kind of pick one up, put it down. And I did play a lot of sports when I was younger, but basketball was year round. And there was something that connected me to skill work, where if you give me a new drill, or if I watch Pistol Pete on his homework basketball videos, which were incredible, if I watch a new skill, I have to work on that immediately and spend a lot of time until I've mastered it. And I started to build my own workout, where I think that's really where my training took a different turn from my friends. Instead of just playing games, it was how many new drills and skills can I acquire, and then having the ability to mentally not get bored. I think kids get bored too quickly with whatever they're doing, and that's where kind of today's society, microwave and instant gratification, it even makes it easier to just go to something else. But Pistol Pete was a huge influence on me, especially with his made-for-TV movie, because I remember the moment. I was probably 9 or 10. I'm watching this. It's pretty cheesy if you remember that movie, but Pistol Pete, as an 8th grader, is sitting in the gym and he's crying because he's been playing varsity basketball as an 8th grader, which is incredible, and he messed up the game and lost the game for his team. He's working on his game, and he's crying, and he's feeling this pain, and he has these big dreams, and his dad walks in, and he says, Pete, I know how you're feeling. I know what you're going through, but if you dedicate your time and all of your abilities to being the best basketball player you can, you will play in college. And then one day he says, you will play in the NBA and make $1 million. That was never my dream, but my dream was to play in college. And watching him struggle, I felt like I was going through that same thing. I wasn't that big. I was kind of slow. I had size 13 feet at a young age, so I looked like a clown walking around the court, but I was skilled and I was tough, and I loved it. And so all of a sudden, the faith that I had, I think, without even realizing it, basketball took the place of that for me and then my family as well.
Well, again, there is a lesson here for anybody listening right now, especially young people, the value of discipline and perseverance, because they've done studies. Let's take it out of basketball. Those who are going to be very successful in terms of music, there is a requisite number of hours, and you can have the debate if it's 10,000 hours or 20,000 hours. I think I have my bias in terms of that, to get to that skill level. And that is true whether you're playing tennis, whether you're playing basketball, whether you want to be a good golfer, whether you want to be a good speaker. There are just a lot of things that require that discipline and that perseverance. And I know that sometimes when you would have a bad game, sometimes even in college, you would go to the weight room and you'd make a point of working out at the weight room near the door so that the coaches would see that you were working out. And so there is a sense in which the lessons that you were learning all the way back in Pennsylvania were very significant. Tony Romo says, I love a good comeback story, and this one has it all. And let's, if we can, get you out of Pennsylvania to Texas, and immediately you find yourself playing against some pretty good individuals. And I remember you said at one point you were so impressed with some of those guards, you thought, are they playing 6 at a time against me? But nevertheless, you began to be successful, and you began to look for the possibility of going to college on a scholarship.
Yeah, the move to Texas was huge. I followed my first ever coach, Steve Yoder, from Pennsylvania. He moved to Texas to the Colony, and I came down before my freshman year to go to a basketball camp. And at that camp, I met Tommy Thomas, who was the head coach at the Colony High School. He was this larger-than-life character, and he asked me, Matt, what are your goals? And I said, well, I want to make my freshman A team, varsity as a sophomore, and then play in college. And he said, Matt, that can happen for you here. I flew back home to Pennsylvania. On the way home from the airport, told my parents, I need to move to Texas to be a college basketball player. They asked my little sister, who's 3 years younger than me. She said, yeah, let's do it. And 2 weeks later, I flew down here. So my family, when I said before, it was their dream too. They were all in.
Yeah, they were. So you got to be playing, and then it came to the time in which you did make the teams, and it was really a challenge, and you kept working and working and working. And then it came to, I guess you went first to SMU and were underwhelmed, and then you went to Baylor and met Dave Bliss. Talk about that.
Yeah, the work ethic that I had when I was little, I continued, but now finally my body caught up a little bit, and so I was about 6'3", but I had these point guard skills, but I could also shoot. So going into my senior year at some of these tournaments that you play in during the summer, I started to notice the same schools coming to all these games, and SMU did invite me out. I didn't have the best time. I didn't see the head coach that often. In fact, when I met with him, he made it very clear that he was actually looking at one of my teammates who I thought was better than me anyway, and I just didn't get a good feeling. And then my mom and I went down to Baylor, and Dave Bliss met us along the highway at a gas station, said, hey, you don't need your car. I'm going to take you everywhere. He had a Bible in the back seat, which my mom and later we kind of now think maybe that was strategic because he knew what our family was about and our values. But he took me all around the campus, and I could feel this pride that he had in the university, in the program. And he was showing me off to people like, man, if this guy could come here, just think he made me feel so special, really sold it. And then we got to talk about the offense. And when a college coach says, I want you to be the cornerstone of our program, at that point, I probably would have, if he had the paper out, I would have signed right there. But on the way home, I told my mom, I said, I think that's where I want to go. And in tears in her eyes, she had been praying that it would work out.
And again, I loved your sales job because if you read this, you say, well, it looks like they're running the Princeton offense, and know a little bit about that, just enough to be dangerous, and said, I think, Matt, you are the one to run this as a point guard. And all of a sudden you go, I'm all in. And everything was going pretty well. You had some bad games and things like that. But let's fast forward to, if you can, just how all of a sudden that middle chapter there is the one that I think we all know about. You had kind of a roller coaster. Maybe we should, for just a minute before we talk about that summer, Dave Bliss, on the one hand, has a Bible. He even at one point would have you pray, but he would take your skin off with the way he would yell at you. And those of us that have played basketball, I still think I'm still reflecting on a few of my basketball coaches and some of the really mean things they said to me. And you were the recipient of a fair amount of that, as were your teammates, weren't you?
Yeah, I'd been around some tough coaching before, but
nothing
ever like that.
Yeah.
And he was a brilliant coach as far as X's and O's, and he was Bobby Knight's first assistant coach, so he was a Bobby Knight disciple.
Which is part of the problem.
The difference between the two was that Bobby Knight couldn't separate who he was in practice with who he was in media. It was the same guy, and you got to hear it and see it. Coach Bliss was much better in front of the camera, in front of people. We used to go to FCAs together, so I saw that side of him. But then, in practice or when that door would close,
oh my goodness,
I never seen somebody that could, like you had said before, throwing chairs, breaking a toilet with his foot, yelling and saying things, and then all of a sudden, guys, let's pray. And I remember sitting there as a 19-year-old looking up at him like, are you serious right now? Can you do that?
So anyway, I did want to let people know this wasn't all just, unicorns and rainbows.
No, but I had those 3 years.
You learned a lot.
Yeah, and we were building something. My first year, we had some success beating Kansas. And they were ranked 6th in the country, and I got to be a big part of that game. And I played every game in those first 3 years, sometimes different amounts, but I played every game. But then going into the end of my junior year, I was a starter. I had a solid role, and we were about to be really good going into my senior year. And then it all changed.
The longest summer. I'm not even sure how to set this up, but of course you're talking about a murder. You're talking about all sorts of allegations, true allegations about corruption, graft, drugs. It just unfolded. And those of us that were watching television remember, of course, the death penalty on SMU, but then when it happened to Baylor, the so-called Christian university, I think all of us remember those events. Can you kind of tell us from your experience how unfolded?
Yeah, it was a Wednesday afternoon, and the police showed up after our weight workout, and that was different. We had meetings and everything. Coach Bliss brought us all in, and they were in there, and they asked if anybody had seen Patrick. Patrick Denny. He was a walk-on at that point, or a redshirt at that point, and he was kind of in and out. So at that moment, it was weird that the police were there, but him not being around all the time and just taking off, that was pretty common. And then 2 days later, Friday afternoon, a professor called me that I was friends with, and he said, "Matt, what's going on with your team?" I said, "Oh no, like what are those?" Because we had talked about what guys are doing in class, what guys are doing on campus. I was like, "What are those knuckleheads doing now?" He said, "No, you need to turn on the news right now." He said, "There's a player is missing, and there's a possible homicide." And then I turn on the news, and it says Baylor basketball players, could be involved. And at first I'm sitting there like, am I one of those basketball players that they think is involved? Like, it was the closest I'd ever been to something like that.
Right.
And then you add in, it's a teammate, which even though Patrick and I you're not always super close with your teammates, but you're around them every day. You go through some things in practice and struggle that you do build these relationships. And, so we're wondering kind of where he is, and we didn't know yet what had happened. But after that moment, the next 2 months, it felt like every day was a new revelation of new things. And then the media came in, and we can kind of continue to go into that if you'd like.
Well, might as well, because you're starting to getting questions and those kinds of things. You're doing media interviews. And, of course, the coach is also concerned about the fact that, actually I was paying for this, that, and the other. And so I'm violating NCAA rules. And, of course, you find out he was murdered by a teammate. So, it's like if you wrote this as a script for Hollywood, they would reject it because they'd say this is too incredible. And yet all of that actually took place right there on the campus or off the campus.
In the span of 2 months, I lost 10 teammates. Guys that decided not to come back, guys that graduated, obviously, then Carlton Dotson and Patrick to that tragedy. And also my entire coaching staff, because it found out that right in front of me, they had been doing a lot of things wrong. And there was this moment of, I thought I was living out the dream that I'd had as a 9-year-old, that it was actually happening. I was going to be a starter on a serious top 25 contender, go to March Madness for a coach that I loved, for a university that I loved, and then to find out that everything was really corrupt around me. That was a hard pill. It was the first time I think I had felt that betrayal from somebody that I really looked up to.
And I might just mention that later on, Scott Drew, who is now, of course, the coach, and was the coach coming in your senior year, took a situation I don't think anybody in their right mind would take, but did. And then later on gave credit to those of you, the leftovers. So it's a wonderful story. But we talk about the crisis. A major crisis. You have, wasn't President Sloan at the time, speaking to this issue. You're having all sorts of coaches, including Coach Bliss and others, just bailing. You have a lot of your fellow athletes saying, well, we're going to find another Division I basketball program where we have a chance. But you and at least 2 of your colleagues say, you know what? We're not going anywhere. We're going to be the leftovers. Talk about that.
As a senior, it was difficult to go to another school. And I had actually talked to a few coaches. One was the Davidson coach that that Curry,
Steph Curry,
and played for. And we talked for about 5 minutes, and he just, reaffirmed what I thought I knew, which is 1-year guys, especially guys like me that average 4.5 points a game, play really hard defense, take charges. They're not that special.
No,
and it was going to be difficult. So quickly. Myself, R.T. Gwynn, Terrence Thomas, the other seniors, we were all in staying there and kind of finishing it out. But I remember the Coach Drew's first meeting with us before his big press conference that you've kind of seen on TV. After they won it, they went back and showed him talking about that he was there to win championships. Well, he met with us first, and I remember sitting around that room thinking about 2 months ago, the top 25 contender that we were going to be, and now there's 6 scholarship players, 3 seniors, 2 sophomores, and 1 freshman. The sophomores and freshmen had never played, and 3 seniors. We were not stars. We were role players, and then a bunch of walk-ons. And Coach Drew comes in with the same energy and pep and joy that you see now. He's 32 years old at the time.
That's amazing.
He comes in and talks about hope in the future and how we're going to build a foundation and all the success that future players will have because of us. And for the first time in my life, I could not get on board or believe what a coach was telling me. It just seemed too far-fetched that any good could come from this. And so for the first time in my life, basketball was the problem. I used to, if things were difficult with relationships or I've had a bad game or I was stressed, I would run to basketball, not to my faith. Well, now basketball is the problem. And I had to come to, I think a lot of people do this. Life is difficult. Something they've thrown, that maybe it's a job or a relationship falls apart.
Good point.
And they realize, who really am I and who's my foundation in? And unfortunately, I've realized I didn't have much to stand on in that moment.
And again, that's another one of those life lessons I want to pass on to our listeners, because the real question is, what do you trust in? What do you put your faith in? What is your foundation? Just recently, we were doing a program about what happens when people retire. And if all your self-image is tied into your job, they talk about, one of our guests was talking about, you get kind of a sugar high because all of a sudden I got all this free time, but very quickly it drops into depression. And oftentimes people don't even live that long because then they have nothing to live for because they've trusted in completely the wrong things. And there was a sense in which you were going the wrong direction. And in some respects, this ended up being sort of a wake-up call, but you still couldn't get on board with Scott Drew because this guy, you wonder if he's smoking some of the stuff that supposedly some of the athletes were smoking, because it's like, how in the world do you have hope and optimism given the most dire? I mean, there have been a few coaches that have taken on worse programs. I don't know who they are. This may be one of the worst.
They probably haven't won a national championship at that place. And,
yes. It's just amazing what he took over and then what he was able to do in a relatively short period of time.
It was hard at the beginning. We were losing to teams that Coach Bliss had scheduled as easy wins. We're losing these teams, and I was the only 4-year guy, so I actually knew what it felt like to go up against the Big 12 and all the Hall of Fame coaches and future NBA players that we were going to compete against, and so we're losing to these teams that aren't that good, which means that we're not very good, and so I threw myself into the party scene, and it wasn't something that I'd ever been a part of. And really, up to that moment in my life, I was known on the Baylor campus for not doing that. And it's amazing how in the span of about 2-3 months, you can really turn your back on 21 years of pretty good habits and living. I was now the person that was organizing those things. And really what I was searching for was temporary peace. Just a little bit of joy. Can I just laugh and forget about all this? Because
just numb me for a little bit. Yeah.
Even when we beat Iowa State, we weren't supposed to win any Big 12 games. There's a miracle moment in that season where a group of leftovers, misfits, we do band together. We do start to believe in what Coach Drew is selling and trust each other, band together, and just each night was kind of our championship because we were told before the season that we couldn't play in postseason. Like, hypothetically, if we had been really good, we wouldn't even been allowed to play. That's like you and I going to work knowing we're not going to get paid. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to be there. And so that's what the whole season. But even after we beat Iowa State, and Coach had a 0 on the board. We erased it. We write a 1 down because we had just done something nobody thought we could do. My first questions with the media were to reflect back on the summer. And I was so over that, so done with that, and miserable that even when basketball got good, again, those bad habits remained. And the rest of that season, we did do some things that nobody thought we could do. We actually beat A&M twice, which really feels good. Anytime I meet somebody that went to A&M, I can always hold that over their head, that leftovers beat you twice. But we were super competitive with some of the best programs in the country, even though we shouldn't have been. But again, even though basketball was moving in the right direction, my life was still in shambles because I was pretty empty.
That's the other question. There are people right now that are saying, I'm really discouraged. I don't think I'm ever going to get any kind of advancement in my career, in my job. I'm kind of stuck and I'm just kind of frustrated. Can you talk about what finally turned that around for you? Because in some respects, there are a lot of people right now that are saying, I don't think I'm going to get a promotion. I'm not going to go to the championship. I'm not going to be successful. Many of my dreams that I had when I was a young person are not going to be fulfilled. What would you say to them?
I actually just read a book about this called Make the Big Time Where You Are. And I think Coach Drew was instilling that in us without talking about Frosty's book. But the idea of making the big time where you are, that it's not actually about the physical location. It's not about the job that you have or the actual role that you have, but it's about your state of mind and your heart. And if you can make the big time where you are, which really comes down to be excellent, choose to be excellent in those little tiny mundane tasks that you don't think are very important. I think the byproduct of that is you do end up becoming your best self and doing the best job that you can and possibly propelling yourself forward. But when you're in the moment and you're discouraged, the natural thing is to do less than your best, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy that ends up keeping you in that spot. And Coach Drew was able to get us looking past our current situation and trying to make the big time where we were.
You think about the Bible where the Apostle Paul talks about the fact that you're working not for your employer, but ultimately working for the Lord. And there is a sense in which you really are working for the one, and that is God himself. And so in some respects, there's a really important principle there. And of course, the reason that this has become so successful is that in 2021, the NCAA Men's Basketball National Championship for Baylor. And interesting enough, Scott Drew goes back and even thanks those three of you that were the leftovers and a few others. But also, since you're now the basketball coach at Grapevine Faith Christian School, you do have a chapter that talks about taking some of this and applying it to these young people that you are discipling, mentoring, training, and I think that is a principle that we want to pass on to our listeners as well. Matt, just before we go any further, though, I thought we would mention your podcast. It's Jamodi, which stands for Just a Matter of Doing It. It's a podcast that really could, I think, be a real encouragement to some of our listeners, as where you interview coaches and various leaders and really want to understand their level of success. If people follow the link to you, either to your Facebook page or Twitter page, they can find out a little bit more. But have you been doing the podcast for about 2 years?
About 2 years, and it's really asking coaches not what they do, but how they do what they do. Because I think there's a difference with those high achievers and how they spend their day and the culture that they build. And I've just been able to learn a ton from it in 2 years.
Yes, and I would say if you ever watch your TED Talks and things of that nature, many of them talk about success, and there seems to be some common elements, and that, again, takes us back to some of the things we talked about at the very beginning: discipline and diligence, perseverance, and the rest. But since you are now a coach and obviously a teacher, I thought it would be good just to talk about how you've taken these principles that were so defining in your life and now apply it into the lives of these young men who maybe aren't even going to make it to college, but certainly could learn some of those life lessons from you.
Yeah, Jamodi was a term that I learned in 7th grade at a basketball camp. And a coach, I don't even know who it was, but he's teaching us to drill, and we couldn't do it very well. And he just said, guys, listen, it's just Jamodi. It's just Jamodi. We go through a little bit more. And he says again, hey, remember, it's Jamodi. And finally, one of the campers had the guts to say, Coach, what is that word? What are you saying? And he said, it's just a matter of doing it. I loved that. And I actually took that mantra on personally all throughout my playing
time. Yeah, it's
time.
All over your book.
Yeah, my workouts that I built, I called them Jamodi. Then 1, 2, and 3, when they became so big, I had to break them up. And it was this idea of, if you have a dream and a goal, it is just a matter of putting in the time, like you talked about, putting in the time that others aren't willing to do, doing the things moving from Pennsylvania to Texas, right? But then as an adult, and after going through some things, you realize it's not that simple. Like, it is just a matter of doing it, but it's not. There's more. And so I took those letters and with my program, and it has changed over the years, but broke it up to think about joy being the J. Joy is a choice, right? We wake up and it's not happy. Happy is a feeling, but we can choose joy every day. When we do that, it affects the attitude that we have to everything that we do. And attitude is something we can't control. When we have the right attitude, then we can go to the M, which is motivation. Everything becomes motivation. Every difficulty, every brick wall that you have. And when you look at it that way, it goes to the O, which is opportunity. When you're motivated by everything that comes your way, then everything becomes an opportunity to grow and get better. Then, even if things are going well, you just have to be prepared for obstacles, and that's where D, determination, comes in. Right. Are you going to quit? Are you going to leave when things get really, really hard? Are you going to fight, or are you going to flee? And then ultimately it comes back around to the I, which is impact. We're here for others. We're not here for ourselves. And when you can look at every day, I think with those letters and that themes, that shapes you up to have a really productive day, your best day.
And again, you started about with I would have made it integrity, because that was something.
I like that.
And there's a lesson that you learn here. If you were above the fray and you were actually having to answer questions, there's a whole section here on Meet the Press. I remember that one. And all the things that you had to say, all the things you had to do, if indeed you are in some kind of compromise, moral compromise, or if you had gone along with some of this or knew some things about the shooting, just think of where you wouldn't have been even to play that last year. And so as much as I think your ability to play basketball is good, I come all the way back to Coach Wooden, remember Johnny Wooden, and that issue of integrity is really important as well. And it's something else that I think kind of runs through your book and reminds us of the fact that you were honest enough to say at one point you kind of strayed away from that, and then the fact that you came back again. It's really a good testimony.
Yeah, I lost that. I did lose a bit of the integrity that you talked about with those habits. And follow me to Iceland. I got to play there for 1 year.
I saw that.
And that story followed me there. In the first practice, the guy asked me where I played, and I said Baylor, and he looked at me with a puzzled look, and he said, "Don't they kill people there?" And so I thought I could run away from it, which is I think a story in itself, or a lesson that you can't run from your problems.
Right.
Like they'll follow you everywhere, and I didn't deal with them. I just ran and tried to numb it in any way that I could. And after 9 years of that, on my 30th birthday, just really frustrated, I decided to walk into a church. And it wasn't a church that I go to, but I sat in the back and I listened to a pastor, which I felt like I'd heard that story, his lesson 1,000 times before. They passed the visitor card, and I filled it out, and I wrote, "I'm angry, I have questions." Because as a 30-year-old, growing up the way that I did, having the knowledge that I had of my faith, but not necessarily living it out, or possibly even truly believing it, I didn't realize or didn't understand why I was where I was at that point. And I've luckily 2 weeks later got to meet with that pastor that basically said, "Matt, you need to give up control." And I was like, "Well, no, listen, I was baptized when I was 5. I've done that already." He's like, "No. Every where you are in your life right now and everything that's happening to you is because of your choices, your decisions. You're moving away." And so that day I surrendered to God, and the change was pretty instant, but I had grown up with that head knowledge, but then it just moved south a little bit to where I really believed it.
That's so good.
And the cool thing is that for people that do feel like they grew up in the church and had this faith, they strayed. So how could God possibly accept them back? Like that's probably my favorite part, is that He was right there waiting for me, and I've just kind of had that peace over the last 10 years.
Let me just mention that, again, if you would like to know more about the Jamodi podcast, that's available. If people would like to contact you, maybe order some copies of the book, pass them around to all the athletes, and have you come and speak. Is that a possibility?
Oh, I would love that. Yep.
And again, so those are some real opportunities that exist there. And of course, you're at Grapevine Faith Christian School, and as we're getting into the school year once again, I think you would certainly encourage parents and grandparents to consider putting their kids in a Christian school. So much better training and character building that takes place there.
Yeah, the cool part is that we're mandated to have biblical infusion with everything we do. So instead of I was at a public school for 6 years, so I do appreciate those teachers and the mission that they're on. But some of the things that shackle them in some ways, we don't have that, and it really is a great opportunity for kids to academically grow, but more importantly, grow in their faith.
Matt Sayman in studio with us today, and let me just first of all, before we end, mention that if you would like to contact Matt, we have all the links necessary for you. And of course, if you'd like to get a copy of the book and pass it on to a young person that I think would be really encouraged and motivated by it, we have it available on our website, both in paperback and Kindle. So, Matt, thank you for driving all the way over here, spending an hour with us. It was great to meet you face to face.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was awesome.
Well, hope you appreciated the conversation we had here today. And don't forget that if you would like more information about what we're talking about, you can find it at the website pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.